If you do the prompt in the wrong way, it'll give you the wrong answer. So it is amazing, the technology, but it needs to really be handled with care. As a rule, the more vendors you have involved with a project, the more complex and challenging it is to make it happen well. Culture of an organization has to actually look out for people and actually try and make them have a good time at work, learn from work and everything else.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Ctrl+Shifter, a podcast from SmartDev and Vericel AI, where we feature the voices that take control and tell the stories that drive the shift. And today we're joined by Thomas Naylor, founder of Hifo, a transformation leader with more than 25 years of experience across IT due diligence, enterprise transformation, and cyber resilience. From Seagram to Universal Music Group, and now he has launched a very exciting product called Hifo. And we'll soon talk about this later. But Thomas, thank you so much for being here, and it's such a pleasure to have you.
Very happy to be here.
Let's start from the beginning. You started your tech career at Seagram and later moved to Universal Music Group. So how did your time at Seagram and Universal Music Group, which is all the enterprise scale, shape how you manage big technology changes today?
My work at Seagram, I did a lot of projects in the application in the infrastructure space. It was project management and project delivery, and also around IT requirements. And to answer your question, one thing which I learned really early on is you need to be really precise, you need to communicate effectively, and you need to be able to pick up all the points and make sure that then you progress any points or issues which have been raised. If you want to manage a project well, you have to capture everything and you have to deal with everything. And one of the more exciting projects which I worked on was with a team based in Cognac and a team based in Chivas. The requirement was really to move off really old legacy whiskey production systems and upgrade it, in fact, across the world so that everything could be managed more efficiently. And it wasn't end to end, but the system which we were putting together was going to manage everything from when the grain went into the distillery for the malting process and then the distillation process and start to make the raw spirit to when it came, 15 years later out of cask and into the blending hall vats. And it was really interesting because you had to deal with every single element of the process, from the cask aging through to evaporation to reporting to HMRC and, the actual formulas of the whiskey, the aging of the whiskey and the management of the casks so that you only use the cask the right amount of times. And at the end, we developed the system. It went live. It was approved by HMRC. So all that reporting was automated. And then it was rolled out in Ireland, in Canada and North America as well. So it's a very successful implementation. What was interesting there is that they looked at different options. Are you going to use an ERP? JD Edwards was at the time. Or would it be better to actually develop your own system? And the decisions were both ways, or, they were both considered. But at the end of the day, there weren't really systems which dealt with inventory that evaporated and the complexity of whiskey production and the ways, reporting to HMRC. And if you're going to do that with a standard ERP, the modifications would have been huge and very expensive. That's the other side about, IT. It's relationships and trust and treating each other with respect and being absolutely fair during the entire process. I've done global data center moves and I've done global infrastructure upgrades. I've been part of the broader team. And sometimes it's been an external company doing most of the work. Sometimes it's managed internally. But again, it's about clarity with regard to understanding exactly what needs to happen, allocating responsibility fairly and clearly, and understanding and commitment from the people who are going to be needing to execute on the component tasks for the program. And also being continually open from a communication perspective. So you have to be, as it were, a safe pair of hands, and people have to be able to trust you, and they have to know that if they share information with you, you will handle it responsibly, and you work on their behalf and effectively resolve the issues quickly. With IT, you've got to make huge amounts of things to get it all right. We've done all the testing which we can, but please do expect the odd error or mistake, and we'll work through it when you go live. Data center moves which have gone because the testing has been done so well in advance. They've gone, absolutely smoothly.
I think here, clear, fair, trust, and respect between people, and a bit stressful in there, really gonna did shape how you turned out today, how you lead, how you drive innovations and digital initiatives today. And we can see how all of those experience set the stage of the company that you've been working on now, which is Hifo. And what made you start Hifo, and how did it solve the headaches you saw in vendor selection? Anyone who has to research tech vendors knows it can be slow and confusing, right? And your tool seems to really cut through that.
The thing is that IT projects, they have this reputation for failing quite frequently. And there's many reasons why an IT project can fail. To my mind, there aren't any actual good reasons, and IT projects should be as successful as building a building. It's about planning, it's about execution, it's about certainty of what's going on. But one of the key things, just like when you're building a house, if you want to do it well, you need to find the right vendors and suppliers. And with technology, what's interesting is that it's always moving. There's process and methodologies evolve, and also technologies evolve. And you want to make sure that you're choosing the best of breed from a technology perspective, the stronger vendor who's going to be a right fit for your company. You can't be too bleeding edge, as it were, because then you could get sharp, but you need to be leading edge. So you'll get those technologies in place, which are going to give you that required business advantage. And so the research process, it's quite exciting in a way, because you want to say, right, I want to consider all the vendors who do this thing. I want to understand how they do it differently and better. And I want to understand who their competition is. And this would be a 1 or 2 or 3 week. You look at a search engine, you'll get a few companies, but you won't get them all. So the taxonomy of knowledge, it's not structured. It's just going to be a different result each time. Whereas if you have a directory of companies and a dictionary of services, and then you can navigate around the different services, you can make sure that you have actually considered all the different angles of the companies who could solve your problem. But also, by having a dictionary, you can understand exactly what that generic service is, and then also be informed from a buyer perspective. And then the actual vendor can say how they do that service differently or better. So you don't have to navigate through a huge, deep, complex website. You can just compare one company with another really easily. It's very much to solve the pain. And so with Hifo, 1,200 companies on there at the moment, 400 have created their own profiles. There's good engagement. More companies which list, then the better, the more it's going to become the go-to place for that first initial research. And then the final point is with Hifo, you can do that really easy side-by-side comparison. It's better companies that want to be compared. It's a slightly worse company that doesn't want to be on Hifo because they want to snaffle that deal before their vendor or their client finds out other companies who can do it differently or better. It sort of attracts the better companies to list rather than the worst ones. And then, of course, perhaps the worst companies also list because they realize they have to be on Hifo because Hifo is the place which is the most convenient place to do that initial vendor research.
Yeah, totally agree. Everyone, I've got a chance to see how Hifo really works, and that's such a huge time saver for us who also looking for a tech vendor who supported in other projects as well. It making vendor info becoming clearer and also be able to compare with each different vendors, and also having a data backed behind really help selectors move faster and smarter as well. And I believe executives who are listening to this podcast would face the same headaches. So audience, what you waiting for? Let's zooming out a bit. Since you span experience from enterprises to now you're coordinating a startup, right? With technology changing so fast, what are the biggest challenges you face leading in digital transformation? Like, this is a common theme for a lot of tech leaders trying to keep things moving while still juggling with old system and really tight deadline, I would say.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is, you can frame it in the paradigm of people, process, and technology. And if you want to make sure that a technology transformation is going to work well, the essential thing you need to look after is the people aspects. Nobody likes moving from one system to another, and sometimes the system they had before might have been better in some ways than the system which they need to move to. The problem with vendors is they're very good at selling what they do, and sometimes there's vendors who are very evangelical. They can sell a great job, but when you look under the hood, it's not so great. Whereas you've got other vendors who don't sell themselves so well, but what they do is brilliant, and the platform is really good and actually works wonderfully. You've used Hifo, you've discovered actually the best fit company for what you need, and then you're moving ahead. But the thing is, you're still not out of the woods, because you could have a short list, but you've got to make sure that culturally there's a fit. You've got to make sure that the size of the company which you've chosen is able to support the size of company that you're working with. So if you're a vast multinational, it can be challenging if you have a really small company to support, or it can be that it can work well. It depends on the scope of the effort. From a contracting perspective, if the contract is managed really strictly to deliverables and the company is absolutely, it's going to start, the vendor is going to start to be penalized if it's not meeting those and deliverables, it can start to create, as it were, cracks in the relationship before it even begins. So there's one side, you need to have clarity on what needs to happen. But the other side is you cannot allow really tight contracting to start to destroy the relationship before it even begins. So trust and competence and flexibility from a vendor perspective, and also knowledge on the buyer side, is really important. And that's often where an ERP implementation can fail. Would you have someone fly a plane if they weren't actually a pilot? No. And so you need to have the expertise on the client side as well as on the vendor side. And that's going to be one of those, primary mitigators of risk for successful implementation.
Yeah, I see. So that takes a lot of energy and effort to manage. From the vendor, that can be a third party side, right? And how about from your own organization, from your own company? Because we also face a lot of challenges when dealing with vendors, and to have vendor deliver right to our expectation. But it gets tricky when different department and different people have a different goals in that. So how do you handle tough technology decision or changes when multiple teams they has different goals?
The way in which a project or program is structured is really important. The way in which communications are managed, and that you need to have regular structured calls with the right people on, so that they understand, as it were, who's doing what and how they need to be doing it and when they're doing it by. And there needs to be sufficient education process as well, because, when you've got a new technology, people need to understand it on the client side and on the vendor side as well. As a rule, the more vendors you have involved with a project, the more complex and challenging it is to make it happen well. And it's, again, all to do with managing those relationships. As soon as vendors start, there needs to be someone centrally who takes that responsibility with regard to all issues and then works through as a very fair and even-handed way without ascribing blame at any point. The fact is that most vendors can actually do a job really well. Keeping relationships smooth, building on those relationships, and being that open level of communication, and also being trusted. The more honesty you get with regard to errors, the more easily you can solve them. The problem is that the stress is sometimes really high. So there is a tendency, understandable human tendency, for people to get upset. But the problem is that then has repercussions down the way. So the rule is never let people know that you're upset. Just get on with it and say, life is tough, but that's part of what it's about. Just make it happen well and support people on that journey. It's interesting because you can get sometimes vendors who oversell, and then that's going to be an issue, because in good faith, you've accepted what they've said and then they haven't delivered. And that, again, is something which you need to try and establish before you sign that contract. The key thing is, if you find people who are properly passionate about the technology that they do, are really proud of what they do, then they're going to be a good company to work with.
It's really complex. More vendors, more challenges need to face, and more things we need to work on. You've been talking about so many projects that you involve, so many clients that you deal with. What trend are shaping IT transformation and vendor choices right now?
Which is interesting is that new technologies, new kind of panaceas for solving everything, they come around every 5 years or 10 years, and the dot-com bubble, and now it's AI. It's funny when something which has been around for a while, such as AI, suddenly takes off. Managing expectations, because the interesting thing is sometimes in tech you need to actually hype in order to sell, because what you're doing is really complicated. So it's like a double-edged sword. If you don't, as it were, hype it up, like the way in which, say, these large ERP vendors do it, then they probably wouldn't get any sales. But then there's the journey of doing the detailed work as well. But AI is interesting because, you can say Builder.ai, they really hyped up the way that they were the new AI low-code platform, and they got all their results and everything else, and they featured well in the market research companies. And then suddenly the funders pull the plug because they weren't delivering. There was some some allegations with regard to bad practice having been proven one way or another from an invoicing perspective. And then also they were saying AI wasn't doing it, but people in the back end were. And the thing is, you don't know the extent because you can easily start to, they might not have been, they could have actually been getting there, but it's about understanding what AI and large language models do and how they work. And the problem is if it says that they're intelligent systems when they're not, then you're starting to work from the incorrect premise. If you're starting to say, well, they're actually systems which can absorb a huge amount of information and make, as it were, reflective patterns of intelligence which reflect that huge volume of information, which can really save you a huge amount of time and judge your own human decision making, then you're starting to get the idea. So you've got an AI agent who's working at a call center and you've fed all the information which that AI agent can do. They can be a lot more efficient and better from a consumer perspective than perhaps a human person can be. But as soon as it starts to get more complicated, or if you actually don't like talking to a bot but want to talk to a person, then it's not going to be the same thing. So, AI is phenomenal, particularly, the large language models, but it's been oversold. So this is part of the fun of the whole vendor research, is really getting the understanding of the actual strengths and weaknesses versus the things which, ostensibly they say you can do it. And the key thing that companies do again and again is say, we have to get AI. Sorry, what's AI to do with anything? You have a business, your business does stuff. You need to get, as it were, tech solutions which will assist your business in doing that. So if you have a new business outcome, say that you want to improve your marketing performance and everything else, you map that out and then you identify all the different technologies which can potentially do that. But if you try and say, we're going to implement AI, that's going to be something which is going to fail because you haven't identified the business outcomes which you want. So you don't even have, as it were, a success criteria to map it to. So that's, again, coming back to that earlier point, it's having a clear understanding of what you want at the very beginning of the process and then choosing the right vendors and the right technologies to deliver it.
Yeah, some leaders I talk with, there's two of them saying that generative AI or large language model, that's like a black box. You input something in there and they give out something and they give the output and they don't even know why and how to crap things out like that. And and there's also a current debate about whether the LLM models are really do things like reasoning.
It's acknowledged that AI doesn't understand what it reads and doesn't understand what it's writes. It's an algorithm. And what it does is it mirrors the intelligence of the material which it's been working off. Now, the thing is, these large language models, such as they've been trained on everything. Yeah. And so if they've been trained on rubbish, then they're going to be regenerating that rubbish. If they've been trained on, as it were, sales evangelism with regard to the brilliance of every product which they go and see, then they're going to say every product's brilliant. They don't have any intelligence and their results will be skewed. And so you've got the hallucination piece as if it's like an error. No, it's actually built into the model because it's the way in which the model's been taught to communicate. So if you do the prompt in the wrong way, it'll give you the wrong answer. So it is amazing, the technology, but it needs to really be handled with care. And that's why a lot of the projects, they're over-promised and lack of, as it were, understanding with regard to the limitations, but kind of believing in the power of AI means that they won't get anywhere. But the thing is that there are projects which are really succeeding and delivering huge value. I mean, if you look, say, the value of having AI looking at, as it were, cancer ontology, and they can look at every single ontology image with regard to a certain type of cancer. And so the doctor can have an idea, then they can look at AI, and then they can research. Then you can go back and research and see the images which have been referred to, which again, on Hifo, there's AI as a service, where you know the inputs, and you've, as it were, validated the outputs, and then it's something which is fantastic. If you're just using a large language model and you don't know even whether or not you're legally using the information, let alone if it's actually correct, then, again, it's that black box, which your other experts have talked about. It's just useless. You have to know the process, the data which is incoming, and then you can be confident with regard to the output.
Yeah, I like the term that you frame. AI as a service would be great. Instead of just some random LLM model, people put it in and with some maybe LLM model and API of it, put in that and say that this is AI powered tool. And I think we've been talking about many emerging tech that promises a wow ROI here. But in the end, making a right call is still a really tough part in here. So how do you approach evaluating new technologies when advising enterprises and private equity clients? You also said about having a clear business outcome, business goal in mind first, but can you break down it more clearly?
There's a number of things which you can look at a technology and everybody's moving towards it. I listened to an interesting podcast recently where it was an executive who first worked for Oracle, then he worked for Siebel, and then he worked for Salesforce. And it was interesting. Those technologies, like Siebel, was oversold and it was really not a particularly strong system. And then you move on to Salesforce, which was transformational and it was a good system, but they had some very interesting sales techniques. The thing which is important when you're looking at new technologies is you can't be committing your enterprise to a technology which hasn't been properly tested, because then you're going to incur too much risk. So prior use cases with clients and, genuine use cases rather than client references are really important. And then the depth of expertise within the company as well, so you can validate, do they have the skills and, the team which is going to be working with you to actually do it well. And all those are kind of really key elements of due diligence. So the other thing which is interesting is to look at the turnover, the profitability of the client, of the vendor, and the preferred client size and the country served. Because if you've got a global company, you need to make sure that for the different offices which are going to be supported by this initiative, they're actually going to be able to have got a company which is going to be able to support them. So, again, that's a key factor. Turnover and profitability and growth. If a company has been growing well over the last 4 years, it's profitable, and it's of the right level of turnover to be able to serve as a company like yours, then it's likely to be a good choice. So you've got qualitative and quantitative experience and then, track record with regard to that new technology too. So new tech is exciting. It's why most of us work in IT, because it's actually the things which are amazing, which can be done. But it's it's the people aspect and managing those emotions.
Well, so you also been talking about managing expectation. I think it's not only just for vendors, but also for a day-to-day operation, day-to-day task assigned as well. So yeah, but I think let's be real here. When we do some change in an organization, and it's even be more complex when it comes to technology, I would say even the real tools or the real technology will fail if we don't have it go along with the culture, like the right mindset. I think you already heard this, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? They said this all the time. They emphasize the importance of culture in the company, in an organization, to drive things forward together. So what kind of culture that helps team actually adopt the new system?
First, it has to be respect and openness.
Yeah.
And you have to listen to the quietest person in the room. There has to be psychological safety, because in order to do something well, you need to collect all the objections. Now, if somebody, thinks, I can't mention that objection because I'll be seen as a blocker to the project, then you are lining up problems later on. So that's one thing which is important. The other thing is that you will get people within an organization who haven't been brought along the journey, and therefore they'll sit back and they won't participate. They'll do the minimum of what's required, which again, creates risks. So it's, from a cultural perspective, and also when you've got vendors, you need to treat your vendors as part of your team. You can't, there you go and do it, and then say it's the vendor's fault. That is the wrong culture. Yeah. So vendors and clients need to work together as partners. And basically, life is tough. Work can be really tough. The culture of an organization has to actually look out for people and actually try and make them have a good time at work and get, learn from work and everything else. And that's an interesting thing. So you've got to have a culture of not shouting at people and saying, get stuff done, but training people, making sure they know what needs to be done, and actually building them as people and also from their technical skills. And then when you've got a culture like that, your company is going to achieve amazing things, because people are going to be able to do their job well and succeed at it and be respected by their peers and colleagues. And that's what you want to do in life. And when you get these bad cultural factors, then companies, people still, I need to stay in this job, I hate this company, and they'll still do it, but there isn't a need for it. So sometimes you do get individuals who need to be moved out of an organization, sometimes at quite senior levels, because from a cultural perspective, they're catastrophic. But the thing is, because they're so good at managing their own way within an organization, they're sort of kind of bolted in and they're difficult to move out. But, then that's really, so that's like one of the most difficult things is sometimes you get supposedly really efficient operators within a company who don't actually have the right cultural approach. And therefore, they, the way in which they lead is wrong. And then that wrong form of leading then disseminates throughout the organizations. You get all types, and you get wonderful people to work with, and you get people who are, and the thing which is interesting is I obviously try and drive the right culture, and also if I'm choosing a vendor, I will only choose a vendor who's got the right culture. But culture is like as important as the functional capabilities and the technologies which a company uses.
Okay, so I really like the one that you said, which is the quietest voice in the room, because they could be the person that speak at the risk that maybe easily be unforeseen. And if we can listen to them, we can maybe manage our risk management more effectively. So yeah, but how to really have the quietest voice in the room make a sound, right? Because not really everyone, even though they just look standing there and observe this one will have a risk, but they probably wouldn't set it out.
Well, it's about having those relationships, because some people don't like to say things in a room, but you've got the relationships and someone will flag that with you one to one. And if you are someone who's seen as someone who's not going to create issues, but will actually solve issues, then people will come to you with their problems. So the problem is that also within any meeting, there are always going to be people who can talk a lot. And you also need to try and encourage people, mediate the conversation so that everybody, if they haven't spoken, you can ask, what are your views? But I mean, it's a really tricky thing because it's about the communication when you actually roll out the communication about a new project. And now, if you've told everybody this project is happening, then they could have some things which they know can't make a difference now, but they should have actually been consulted with at the earlier stage in the process. So it's something which is very difficult to get completely right, but it is more open, the culture of communication, and the more respectfully that people speak to each other, then the better things are going to be.
I believe having an open and a transparent environment is very essential, especially when prevent any serious risk would have. So yeah, so we're talking lots about tactics, plan, takeaways on a high operation level. So let's dive deep into your expertise and what you've been done here. What's your top-down process from picking a vendors to launching a system? Like maybe give some step-by-step, because you told me about having a clear business outcome is the first step, and understanding deeply on the client side and from the vendor's side. So what are the upcoming steps so people can follow along?
I mean, I guess, the first thing is you've got the business outcome, and then from that business outcome, there's going to be different approaches to do it. And so if you're, say, talking about, say, an infrastructure change, you've got a team running a mainframe, but it's actually not really what you want to be doing as a company. And it's also your mainframes are in different data centers around the world and around Europe, and they're costing different amounts of money and, the support and everything else. You've got to consolidate them, but do you want to consolidate and then outsource, or do you want to outsource, or do you want to co-locate, or what do you do with the team? Do you have the same team? Do you move the team to a good vendor? Once you know the business outcome, there's a further stage of analysis. What's the best strategy to get this outcome? And then you go through that, and once you've got the strategy to get that outcome, who are the vendors who can deliver on that strategy? And then once you've identified that long list, then you go through that long list and identify which ones have got the better strategy, which ones are going to be more appropriate. That's where Hifo can come in. And then once you've gone through that, then you bring them in. It depends on the size, because if it's, say, something really generic, which is out of the box, which is a SaaS, you don't do that. There's it depends. So for some large procurement projects, you'll need to go through a really intensive process. For others, you really want to know I want to find companies who are going to do some pen testing. I need to have my pen testing also to get my supplier due diligence questionnaire for my important client answered correctly. So who can do that? And it's just a real pain to try and research, whereas with Hifo, you can get that listing really easily and get that. So you don't need to go through a long process, and you can identify companies quite quickly. You can do some high-level checks with regard to their capability, and then you're off to the races. Whereas if you're talking about a big change program, it's a longer process. And then the RFP, it needs to really go into the detail with regard to the capabilities which need to be delivered, because the service provider needs to make sure that they can properly look after that environment, and then also take the team with them and look after that team, and move. Everything needs to be done properly from a 2P. So that's then you go through that negotiation process. Hopefully, you've got to negotiate it fairly, so you've got a contract which is going to manage a good relationship going forward, and which is going to enable the vendor to deliver on the relationship to stay strong. And then you sign, and then you go through, again, the implementation process, which again needs to be managed well and smoothly, and support the vendor and the client in that. So it depends on the nature of the requirement as to the detail and the number of steps. But there's a lot of steps and stages in the process. But the thing which is critical is to have a business outcome at the beginning, and make sure you have that in mind during the entire process, and then measure, as it were, the success of the program by the extent to which that business outcome is delivered to.
Yeah, so I believe that it's not always step 1, step 2, 3, 4, 5. It's gotta be depends a lot on the context. Maybe it should be a branch reaching out. It would be better to explain how to selecting the vendors, how business working on to select the vendors. It depends a lot.
I mean, the thing which is useful is that part of that spreadsheet which I put together is things like turnover, growth, and profitability, as I've mentioned before, are really important. It's the qualitative and quantitative criteria. It's the things like culture and everything else. And what you want is to have a list of companies, firstly, with the capabilities to deliver. And then you need to look at, to my mind, then you look at the culture, rather than firstly look at the culture and then the capabilities, because the capabilities and the track record are easy to establish from easier to establish from a quantitative perspective. The culture is going to be a key part of that short assessment is a key part of that selection process. Can I trust this company? Is this a company that I want to work with? Is this company a company which is going to deliver on its as it were, promises, but also help my teams internally and my company grow?
Yeah, so I think it's not just about agreement requirements, but it's also about really hard on relationship planning and communication in this transparent way that can together make all of these things really work. So from all of the extensive project you've been working for the client side, from the internal operation side, so what common mistake do you see in digital transformation, and how can people avoid them?
It depends on the size of it. Looking after the people side, making sure that people are well trained, making sure that you have, again, it's the communications. The way you do an IT project was waterfall, but IT projects used to fail, but they weren't necessarily failing because of the waterfall methodology. They're failing for the sets of reasons which we've discussed before. And now what you've got is agile, where you'll just kind of make it up as you go along. A good agile project, the more that you can do in it with regard to the clarity of what you're trying to accomplish, then the greater you'll manage the risk of not delivering on that project. And also the more cost effectively you'll manage that project. And so, to my mind, an agile project, it's like you never build a house without deciding where the bathroom was going to be, first of all, because then you built the house and suddenly you don't have the pipes for where the bathroom is going to be. And it's the same with any tech project, is you need to design the architecture of what you're trying to do and do that right. Otherwise, you've really set yourself, if you do it in an entirely agile way and you haven't tried to think of everything in advance, then you've got this massive gotcha at the end, which means you need to go through a huge amount of stuff to re-engineer it. So, agile is brilliant, in particular with regard to continuous testing of, and the DevOps cycle rather than development and operations are separate. It's very powerful, absolutely essential and amazing. So being able to roll out updates because of the way in which automated testing is now available, and the agile development life cycles and sprints, they are brilliant. But you can still manage a project well. I still think you should be able to ask a client, say, no, let's get an understanding of that. So you do a discovery phase where you lock down on the certainty, and then from there on, you then get a firmer understanding. So, yeah, it's the requirement side is the most interesting, but it's around that ambiguity of language. And people can say something, as I said before, kind of make the system fill a bath and think that's all that there is. Whereas when you start to drill down, you're actually building this incredibly complicated system, and you need to understand what you're going to do in scope, what you're going to do out of scope. And investing that time up front is actually a really important thing for any form of IT project, rather than just saying, look, we're going to do this, let's do it. And so whether it's an infrastructure change project, you need to work into the detail of what's going to be happening in advance, and also do the tests and the retests. And so you get the user acceptance testing and all of that. And the more you do the testing and the more training you do, the risk of that project failing kind of quickly moves towards zero. If you don't train, if you don't test, if you haven't specced out what you're trying to do, if the devil is not in the detail, then you're creating issues.
Okay, I see. So from what I understand is you're currently facing so many expectation or requirements that is at this too high level, not detailed, not specific, and not being monitored continuously or tracked on continuously. And that's also the thing that you're seeing the flaws.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because for any set of requirements, you need to look at it with a verbal hat on, but also with a logical hat on. And it's a bit like AI. AI can put stuff out which sounds very logical, but then you realize that actually it's just a word salad. And it has no relation to the stuff which is analyzed, but it seems as if it does. And with requirements as well, it's important to be really precise and to make sure that they've got, it's at that level and that level, they're tight. And so, it's like, but it's challenging because if you end up getting into too much detail, you're never going to get anywhere. So you need to balance, but certainly you need to get sufficient clarity in terms of what needs to be accomplished, who the team are going to be, that their competencies are right. And then, you're off to the races.
So I believe that when it comes to strategy, trying to do anything at the same time, not dig into detail, usually have the risk higher than if we take into account the detail and all the backup plan into, I would say, those thoughts and insights that you had gained after more than 25 years is such a real goal right now. And I know lots of our listeners will take these straight back into their team after listening to this. So we've been talking about AI, and it's also a thing that everyone care about and want to look in ahead a bit. So where do you think the tech and vendor space is heading in the next 3 to 5 years with the addition of AI technology, and what should be people be thinking about now to stay ahead?
Don't look at the technology. Look at what the technology can do. You can see the capabilities which what it can deliver on. But you still need to define it first. And those capabilities can inform, as it were, business outcomes. But you still need to define the business outcomes first and then use the technology to accomplish those outcomes. And of course, one thing which is so interesting with regard to vendors is that some vendors will give you, as it were, a competitive advantage. And so if you're a buyer, you won't be able to find those vendors because people won't refer them on because they want to keep them a secret. And this is one of the big things about if you're doing a brilliant job, people won't necessarily shout about it because the job you're doing is too good and they're not going to refer you on. So you've got very interesting things in the review space. But back at the beginning, what I said, you've got to identify, you've got to understand what the new technologies do. And so what it is, what are the real capabilities rather than the oversold bit. And on one side, on the other, you've got to see, what are the business outcomes which I'm looking for, and then make sure that technology can do it. So there's going to be so many things which can be done better with AI and faster with AI, which will enable, more competitive, more efficient management of issues. Say in the cybersecurity space, you've actually got an arms race. You've got cybersecurity bad, all the hackers who are using AI to attack you. And then on the other side, you've got people using AI to have greater visibility and control with regard to what potentially is a malicious threat or an incursion into your network versus what is, business as usual. It's, there are arms races, as it were, from a cybersecurity perspective, which already existed, but with AI, it's going to be even worse. I think it was in Singapore where this woman was on a call with all the members of her team to make a transfer of a huge amount of money. And they were all agents, and they convinced her they were, as it were, avatars of the real people. And there was sufficient idea that it was just a voice call, but they managed to do it. So the thing is, the landscape is changing and being impacted. But the fact that this AI was used to manage it was, at the end of the day, psychological manipulation. It was social profiling. but it was also kind of cybersecurity hacking to actually get that done. So there's going to be, there's greater risk in that space than from a business perspective in terms of customer service, much more efficient and improved, provided it's done right. But also if you do it wrongly, then you can end up destroying customer relationships. So it's similar to, say, a few years ago when you get to outsource your customer service center to, say, now it could be that could be a very good change and it'd be done much more efficiently and cost effectively, or alternatively, you could start to lose customers. So it's not a question of, there's a lot of things that technology can do, but it has the same number of caveats that, say, moving outsourcing an internal support team has. So you need to handle it care. But the thing which is interesting is the process and the principles. They're really independent of the technology. But there's no doubt that, say in MarTech, things are evolving so quickly, and what works and what doesn't work changes because people will start to, say, interact with a certain way of being sold to, and then they'll get tired of it. And then you need to move on the best things. Broader culture out there, and you always need to be slightly ahead of the game.
It's really clear on how AI would change all of the aspects regarding the threat it will make to us, and even it can boost our efficiency, especially in the customer side. In Vietnam, for us, we also have a few cases like that. There's an organization that's setting up targeting all the old people in Vietnam, and they're using video call to fake their child or their relatives, and then do the video call and asking the old people to transfer the money.
Appalling.
Yeah, and lots of the old people get scammed. And I think also not just for taking into account these challenges, but also got to work a lot on educating these people to really be mindful of all of these things, be well prepared to not having these affected, I would say. And there's, I think, as you also know, that there's a department that popped up in many enterprises currently is AI governance department, that they manage the data and ensure the compliance of these things. And as our company, also a software development company, we use the code generation tools to really do all the code. But we have to make sure that the tool that we use didn't use our code to train their models.
It's the black box that we discussed earlier with regard to AI. And again, probably one of the reasons why Builder.ai, selling this glorious vision of kind of applications developed in an instant. But actually, there's a whole number of governance issues and IP issues which need to be looked at really carefully. You've got proprietary software and you've got open source software, but there's levels of open source software. And then you've got SBOM, software bills of material, which you need to understand. And then you've got software vulnerabilities within those SBOMs. And if you say you've got AI generating code, you need to know exactly where it's taking that code from. And the problem is that all those vulnerabilities, that AI is not going to know about those vulnerabilities within those SBOMs. But you're then creating some new code which will have those vulnerabilities which the AI might not have stopped. So there's a lot of gotchas. So then you've got your testing processes and everything else. But the IP element's really interesting because the large AI companies have sort of said, it doesn't matter that we've taken all these old books and used them without, as it were, accrediting the authors or anything else because it wasn't being used. Whereas in fact, they were breaching IP. And then you've got, interestingly, if say an actor has got permission for the face to be used and everything else for, being a model and everything else, and you're creating it, that's fine. But if you're actually stealing an actor's voice and video, they've spent the voice and visual appearance, and they've spent a lot of their entire life, as it were, creating who they are from a commercial perspective, then it's outright theft. But what's so interesting is, of course, then they're doing it on politicians too. And I think, some politicians are fair game for that sort of thing. But even so, you need to be consistent. And, so it's interesting. You've got these two schools of thought. Oh, we can't do technology in Europe because it's too legislated. And in the US, you've got, we need to have like the Wild West because that's who we are. And then they go and have regular kind of absolute catastrophes from, because they're not, there is no legislation. So to my mind, you need to have legislation. Otherwise, you're just storing up problems in the future to deal with. And I want to have an environment such as Europe where, I don't know, Vietnam from that perspective, but you want to have a country which you can, as it were, a country which you can trust in terms of the. I mean, I remember there was a comment on a post with regard to how an earlier product developed by Sam Altman, it was some sort of social networking product. And what it was doing, taking all the details of the contacts of the phone and then contacting them all and then putting itself on those. And it was like, it wasn't, as it were, viral marketing. It was marketing with a virus or whatever. And it was unethical, and you cannot do that sort of thing. So, and then, you get into trouble. So it's, and yet somehow the idea of being an entrepreneur is that you can move fast and break things. I say, no. You can move fast, you can be innovative, you have to test everything well, and when you test, you break things. But you don't set out and say, it's all right, we're moving fast and breaking. No, you need to be ethical, you need to be sound, you need to be designing good products really well. So, yeah, you got me onto my high horse on that a bit.
I believe that there's a lot of way to come for people keep optimizing these tools and also make out the rules and, do something. There has to be to do something regarding how we control people, how to use this. Because, lots of people are using this tool as a very unethical ways as well.
Yeah. I mean, the cyber attackers creating a persona of, say, an elderly parent's child and then using that as a video call or voice call to extort money is just disgraceful. But the other thing is that one person did is he was a hacker. He knew how to hack stuff. He was an ethical hacker. So he then went and connected to them, went and put a virus on their machine and destroyed their system, which is totally unethical. But frankly, I'm not that concerned because these people were basically trying to do the opposites. That was there are things that you can do against these people, but it's the fact that they exploit the vulnerable and just to get. It's really not so. But the funny thing is that banks, for example, you have your mobile phone, you get text messages coming in. Now, anybody can spoof a number. So you get a message in which is from your bank, Barclays or whoever, and it seems like it's come from Barclays because it's sitting with all the other messages. Now, to my mind, banks should notify customers of that and then be aware of. And I don't know the extent to which that still happens, but certainly you get a message, it's come from your bank. The natural human reaction is to work on it. So vendors have a great responsibility to be clearer with regard to the vulnerabilities within their own systems, which means that their customers are psychologically more vulnerable,
Yeah. Yes, totally makes sense. Okay, so I think that's pretty much for closing thoughts now. We talked about how AI can help us and also how AI gonna do some really bad things to us. We gotta be really careful and mindful about this. Once again, I think it's about 9 or 11 a.m. on your time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so hope this could be a conversation that can start your day and reflect back what you've been doing before, what you've been doing right now, and what you've been enthusiastic and passionate about. Maybe changing the way people finding vendors to spread awareness on how these tools could both empower us but also both be a threat to us. So once again, thank you, Thomas, for sharing all of these insights with us. And I mean, this has been packed with really straight talk and very useful strategy and real story here. So you guys, you've been listening to Control Shifter, a SmartDev and Vericel podcast featuring the voices that take control and drive the ship. And we'll catch you next time.